Today we have the great pleasure of having Dr. Greg Lang with us from Michigan State University. We're following up on a couple field days, and Greg, Gail and I just wanted to launch into a few questions about the cold damage that we've seen.
Some growers have no crop, other growers have a little bit of a crop, and then some growers are kind of close to a full crop. And so managing all these different blocks takes some deep consideration. So any thoughts on how they should irrigate? Let's start with a no crop. If we have no crop, how should we be irrigating our orchards?
So I think if we talked about no crop, we can probably talk about various factors, including irrigation for that no crop. We're always concerned that a tree without crop on it is going to just blast out in growth this year. And the more vigorous the growth, the more likely it will be that we have a lower crop or a crop of poor quality next year, because maybe we get too much shade, maybe the wood is too strong and it doesn't set good flower buds. So keeping that tree under control with no crop is the number one concern for those unfortunate growers. And irrigation is one way to do that. You're fortunate here in the Okanagan and Creston areas that you can withhold irrigation at certain points during the growing season to help reduce the vegetative growth. You can also consider reducing the fertilizer, and that's definitely probably the number one initial thing, because growers are going to ask, well, I've got no crop on my trees. Normally I put a certain fertilizer regime out in the spring and maybe follow that up with continuing other fertilizer foliar feeds or granular applications throughout the season. But with no crop, what should I do? And so typically I would say let's not even put any fertilizer out in the spring, because you fertilize every year basically to replace the crop that's coming off the tree. The tree always grows new leaves. Those leaves fall, they decompose, and some of those nutrients go back into the soil. So I would suggest growers hold off on their initial fertilization, let the leaves come out on the tree as they fully expand and mature. Then some leaf sampling can be done to see, okay, what is the nutrient profile that is currently making it to these fruit? And you want to wait until you get some new shoot growth and sample the leaves off of those new shoots, because the initial leaves that are coming out from the storage reserves in the tree, not really reflecting what's in the soil that you would affect with fertilization. So withholding that fertilization until you can get a read on the shoot leaves, then ratcheting downward the irrigation to reduce the push for heavy shoot growth, I think are two key ways to keep those trees under control. There are other tools that the growers have in their toolbox. Root pruning can help reduce that growth. You're probably going to wait until after you see the tree growing. So root pruning we typically do first thing in the spring. So it might be a later tool that has a little bit lesser of an impact than if you'd used it initially in the spring. So those are three tools. There's the use of growth regulators like Apogee. That again, using that early on, you may get the biggest bang for your buck for a tree that is destined to be extremely vigorous. If you wait until the tree's really actively growing, Apogee may work, but it also may take a lot higher applications to really get the tree under control just with Apogee. So I think I would recommend using a suite of tools until you get a real read on how that tree is growing through the season. You can impose further tools to try to keep it within the growth targets that you're shooting for. So that's the no crop situation kind of in a nutshell. There's a lot of subtleties beyond that.
For sure. When thinking about then, the crop that might come in 2025 and preparing for that crop, what do you think about, the fall fertilizing or other types of steps that growers could take to prepare for the next crop?
That's also very important. First is keep the trees under control this year, and that will help with the flower bud formation next year. But you also, if they are vigorous, maybe you need to do a bit more summer pruning than you normally would to maintain good light through that what could be vigorous growth to those flower buds and make them strong. Then to follow up on keeping those buds strong would be a fall foliar feed, fall soil applications perhaps, based somewhat on the leaf sampling you do in the summertime and you see where you're at. But you want to make sure that the tree has a lot of good reserves, strong flower buds, good light to those growing points going into next spring. If the trees are weak, and we know that weak trees often set too many flower buds because they're sort of thinking, oh, am I going to survive next few years? I better reproduce. That weak growth you need to pay attention to and prune that off to keep the trees in balance going into the next spring. So weak growth that would set up too many flower buds, you can come in and summer prune those off. You don't want to go into next spring with weak flower buds. So you want to go into spring with the nice balance of strong buds, not too much growth, not too much weakness.
Do you think that because it's an off year this year and no crop, should growers be preparing for a large crop next year and make sure they do the proper pruning so they're not stuck with overcrop tree and small fruit?
Yes, particularly with apples. Apples can throw into alternate bearing. Stone fruits will have kind of a more subtle alternate bearing. They often don't show that extreme that apples will. So you do want to keep that in mind, and you don't want to get into that cycle. But I think having no crop and then keeping the flower bud strong and keeping the vigor under control won't throw them into an alternate bearing situation or scenario like it would with apples.
I think there's many growers that they're sitting at like a 3-ton to maybe 4-ton crop. Kind of even they're still in the situation where they're deciding whether it's going to be worthwhile for them to pick it. So while they're making those decisions, do you have any steps that they should be taking this spring?
Well, I think if they have 3 or 4 tons of cherries in a market that we know is going to be prioritized or providing premiums for the late season cherries, that's a pretty easy decision to me to make. Preserve that 3 to 4 ton crop, providing you can get the labor. The labor hasn't all disappeared by that time. So for that 3 to 4 ton crop, whatever the percentage would be of what they typically would have as a full crop, that would be a good guideline to guide, okay, how much fertilizer should I give this partial crop? I would make it in proportion to what their normal crop would be. So if their normal crop is 6 tons and it's a 3-ton crop, ratchet down the nitrogen, the fertilizer to 50% of what you typically would provide. You could impose, if you're concerned about still too much vigor with that moderate crop, you could impose some water restrictions at key points. Pit hardening would be one of those points where you're not going to affect the size of the final fruit, but you don't want to have water limiting during the final phase of fruit growth. You could then, after harvest, impose more restricted water to reduce any post-harvest growth that might be apt to occur. But you don't want to shut the tree down entirely. You still need that post-harvest period of fully functioning leaves, full photosynthesis to create the carbohydrates that are being packed into the storage tissues, and have that transpiration stream still pulling in the nutrients from the soil through the remainder of the season and putting that into the storage tissues.
Yeah. So you don't want to overstress the trees at any time.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, in a no crop situation, as long as we don't have an extremely stressful summer with a heat dome type event, you can stress those trees that have absolutely no crop as a means of trying to shut them down. But with a crop on, you're targeting good quality fruit because it's going to be really valuable, and you want to make as much money as you can off of this moderate crop.
You mentioned the heat dome, so that's yet another topic. Any suggestions in the event, like our water levels are low everywhere, and has been a dry spring so far. We're hoping we don't experience another heat dome, but in the event that we have another extreme heat this summer, any steps that you suggest to growers prior to that they can take if there's predictions that that's how it's looking?
Well, fully charging the soil if you have that capability early in the season. So as things dry down, as things heat up, hopefully those roots still have some water available to them if there's very limited water available through irrigation. That also can help, hopefully, drive good root growth in the spring, so you're exploring a greater volume of soil once that heat hits. We've always been somewhat concerned as scientists, and I don't know that we've done good research on it, as to whether it's better to have a big root zone that then only gets watered in a narrow portion of the root, or whether it's better to, from the early stages, try to concentrate the root zone where you know you'll be able to deliver the water to.
Another question that's come up from growers is around, say, their young cherry plantings. We've got lots of young plantings. We suspect there might be some damage to the cambium. How should growers go about managing those young plantings in the situation of, say, recognizing damage? What does it look like? And then how would management happen?
Yeah, I think it's very important for young orchards, for the growers, their field people, etc., to go through those orchards very frequently in these early stages. Look at the new leaves coming out. Look at the color of the leaves, recognizing that if it's cool, the leaves might be yellowish, but it may not be damage and it may not be deficiency. You may need to wait until you get a good stretch of warm weather and then see, are those leaves coloring up and green? And if they're not, or if you start to see collapse in the shoots and in the leaves, then it's time to make some really tough decisions about, do I start part of this tree structure over, moving back to where you see some good healthy buds, some stronger leaves, and just bite the bullet to create the structure that you're going to need for the future. If you wait for that decision too long, you run the risk of having to wait till next year to really create more new fruiting structure and replace what might have been damaged this year.
So that could mean a hard prune this year in some of these higher damage situations. Cut your losses early, try to regrow that tree.
That's exactly it. The sooner you can identify if I have severe damage and make those difficult pruning cuts to regrow that fruit wood, you'll be a year earlier into renewed production. For a full crop and the trees are healthy, do what you always do. Maintain good light in the tree, the typical nutrition programs, the typical irrigation, and take pity on your neighbors that don't have the full crop. Be kind and community oriented.